On the morning we went after Endurance 9, I was also the person who signed the risk waiver because the commander's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The borehole tower groaned above us like an old ship frozen inside a glacier. Around the shaft, the ice was glassy and blue, laced with pale fractures that caught our floodlights and threw them back as a cold haze. The hole, less than 3 meters wide, fell out of sight into blackness. We had cut it over 8 continuous days, melting through layer after layer until the probe's winch line sang with its own weight. Endurance 9 had gone quiet at the 2-mile mark. No warning, no alarms. One moment, a clean ping return from the sub's under-ice tether. The next, a silence so complete, it felt engineered. We tried the usual playbook: power cycle, backup transceiver, dead man beacon. Nothing. The last packet it sent up was a short burst of acoustic data that our software flagged as non-random. Not speech, not any biological pattern we knew. Just a rhythm that made the hair along my arms lift as if the station had been exposed to static. I made a joke then that I wish I could swallow back now. Maybe the ocean is breathing. We named the rescue sled Ariadne. It wasn't a real submersible, just a hardened frame rigged with thrusters, cameras, a thermal lariat, and a coffin-sized cavity to cradle Endurance 9 if we found it intact. I'd spent 2 months building that lariat. If there's anything like pride left in me, it's there, in the braided carbon fiber and memory alloy that could constrict around the sub without crushing it. Pride doesn't help when you're wrong about the thing you're retrieving. I suited with Reyes and Dr. Kwan inside the airlock. The suits weren't for water. They were for the ice shaft, the wet cold that sought any leak and widened it into failure. Our helmets fogged in thin crescents where the anti-fog coating had worn off. Reyes knuckled my visor, a habit he said kept him from thinking about what we were truly doing. Kwan didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the tablet, scrolling through sonar returns, profiles, and the last clean image Endurance 9 had sent us. A wide shot of subglacial ocean, soft particulate, drifting like ash in a cathedral, something long and pale trailing just out of frame. "Say it," Reyes muttered. "Say we'll bring our kid home." "We'll bring it home," I lied. We rode Ariadne down the shaft in a sling attached to the surface crane. Ice walls slid past our faces, bands upon bands, dust years, comet scars. Even frozen, Europa felt restless. The shaft widened where the melthead had dwelt too long, as if the ice had tried to inhale us. The sound down there was wrong. No wind, no fabric, creak. Just the distant throb of pumps above and our own, breathing, loud enough to confuse the suit mics. At the interface, the place where ice became ocean, we hung in steam. The meltwater seethed and then stilled, black and mirror flat. Beneath it, the ocean pulled at us with a mass you feel in your bones. We switched to internal power and jettisoned the sling. Ariadne bobbed once, then eased down, thrusters whispering, lights cutting pale tunnels into the silt. Europa's ocean isn't like Earth's. There is no sky to reflect. The darkness is honest. Particulate hung in sheets that drifted when the thrusters brushed them, then resettled as if grudgingly. The ceiling above us, ice now, showed pressure scars, lenses, pockets like trapped lungs. Kwan deployed the ultra-low frequency sonar. The pulse went out like a heartbeat and returned as a suggestion. The map built itself in a slow stutter of contours. Floor dropping away, ridges like frozen dunes, a vertical structure to port that resolved into nothing when we turned to look. Ghost returns, instrument drift. The ocean doesn't like to be measured. "Marker at 100 meters, Kwan said. "Beacon from Endurance 9 is weak but present." "That's impossible," Reyes said. "Beacon never fired." "It is firing now." We followed the line of least resistance, a narrow channel where currents had carved a canyon in the silt. The beacon tone slipped across frequencies, as if it were climbing stairs we couldn't see. I synced the thermal lariat, cycled the clamps, checked power. Everything showed green, like a joke before a punchline. We found the sub resting on its side in a cradle of darker sediment. Not a scratch. Lights alive, thrusters idle. Windows milked by micro-ice, but clear enough that my stomach gave a small, disloyal lurch. There were shapes inside. I couldn't make sense of them. The external cameras showed us to ourselves in a warped reflection. 3 soft figures in the glow, motes drifting like snow. Power draw is steady, Quan said. Life support cycling. I swallowed. No crew aboard. Endurance 9 was unmanned. Maybe they docked something, Reyes said. But I could hear in his voice that he knew he wasn't making sense. There was nowhere here to dock from. I eased Ariadne alongside and extended the lariat. The alloy warmed with a faint shimmer and uncoiled like a patient animal. As it reached for the sub, the beacon tone died, and for an instant the ocean felt heavier, as if the water itself had leaned in. A whisper filled our headsets. It wasn't a voice. It was the ocean moving past something, a long, wet scrape, like a door too big to see being pulled along a stone floor. Quan flinched. Feedback from the long-range hydrophone. No, I said, because it wasn't feedback. It had cadence. It rose and fell with the same slow rhythm as the signal packet in the last transmission. Not human. Not any ecobiology signature we'd catalogued. But familiar in a way I refused to acknowledge. The lariat touched the sub. All 3 of our suit cameras flickered. For less than a second, the view jumped to an angle we didn't have, a close frame of the sub's observation blister from the outside, as if something were watching us from just beyond the glass. I saw my own helmet reflected there, and behind that reflection, a shape that moved without displacing the water. My brain gave it the word filament, because that was easier than the other word that crowded in. Tendon. Record everything, Reyes said, as if we had a choice. We tightened the lariat. The alloy hugged the sub, latched. Power draw spiked. Ariadne dipped, then stabilized. I started the lift sequence. The ocean answered by pushing back. No current on the instruments, but every actuator worked harder. The pumps whined, a deep animal sound. The ice ceiling above gave a small groan. Wait, Quan whispered. Listen. We did. The whispering scrape organized itself into something like a pattern. Gaps between phrases. Repeats. The same lengths we had flagged as non-random. It was not coming through the hydrophones now. It was coming through the hull. Steel to water to bone. Say something, Reyes said to me, and I didn't understand why until I saw his eyes. He needed a human sound to break the shape the ocean was making inside our heads. Control, this is Ariadne. We have Endurance 9, beginning ascent. My voice came out calm and technician flat, the way training hammers you into sounding when alarms blare. Be advised, we're detecting anomalous hull acoustics. There was no response. The relay through the shaft had always been patchy, but not like this. It felt less like a broken line than a line someone had gently unplugged from the other end. Quan turned her tablet toward me. She had the last minute of the beacon tone on loop, the section before it died. She had overlaid our names, spoken aloud at mission start for calibration, on top of the tone. Not a perfect match, but enough to make my throat close. The rises and falls, the cadence you never notice in your own speech, were there, all 3 of us, stretched, slowed, pressed into something dense and cold. It learned us, Quan said. She didn't blink. From the bubble mics, from the surface check-ins, it learned us. The ocean around the sub went grainy, as if snow had begun to fall underwater. Not snow, strings, filaments. Hair-thin lines descending from the ice above in slow, curious arcs. They didn't catch the light so much as erase it where they touched. One brushed the lariat and left a smudge like frostbite on warm skin. We had Endurance 9. We had what we came for. Every sane impulse in me said go. But under the sane impulses, something else pulled. An engineer's gravity. The same thing that makes you open a panel because a sound is just slightly off. The filaments came from the ice overhead, from channels and pockets, from the structure of the world itself. Up, I said, and gave Ariadne full assent. The thrusters bit. The sub rose by a hand's width, then another. The filaments followed, tracing our motion with lazy interest. Then the lights inside Endurance 9 changed. They didn't brighten. They shifted. Cold white slid toward a color that doesn't exist on Earth, a kind of deep-sea green that eats edges. A shadow moved behind the observation blister. It divided, then recombined, and when it recombined, it did so along planes I cannot explain without drawing a diagram you shouldn't ever see. Quan whispered, "It's in the glass." I looked, and for a brief, treacherous instant, I almost understood. Not an animal, not a plant, not a fungus. A way of being that uses pressure and silence and crystalline boundaries the way we use air. A thing that makes instruments lie because they are the wrong kind of eyes. The ocean whispered again. The tone found my name and stretched it until it was only the shape of my breath. We lifted Endurance 9 toward the ice, and the ice answered by breathing back. The first meter of ascent was smooth. Then everything began to strain. The winch tension climbed beyond expected limits, as though the ocean itself had thickened. Ariadne's thrusters screamed inside their housings, vibrating the frame until every bolt and weld sang in unison. Reyes muttered, "Power's maxed. We're not moving." I checked the diagnostics. The numbers were wrong, not fluctuating, just frozen, as if the sensors couldn't agree that time was still passing. The readouts all displayed the same second, repeating, each heartbeat caught in a loop. Quan tapped her screen. "Telemetry's duplicating. Every packet is coming back twice, then 3 times. The hull moaned. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was voice-like. The slow bending of precious steel translated into something almost spoken. I said, "Kill the thrusters." We drifted in perfect suspension, Ariadne hanging between ice and abyss. The water around us was completely still, like the entire ocean had stopped to listen. For 30 seconds we didn't speak. Then the lights inside Endurance 9 flickered again, a pulse that ran from bow to stern. Reyes whispered, "That's communication." "No," Quan said. "That's imitation." Her meaning sank in a moment later. The pattern in those flashes matched the timing of our breathing loops, the rhythm of our air systems, our lungs, rendered in light. The hull sensors registered movement, something brushing along Ariadne's underside. Slow, deliberate. Not a current, not debris. The sonar pinged back a shape. Long, segmental, hundreds of meters below, then curling upward, as if coiling around us. "Tell me that's a data echo," I said. Quan shook her head. "If it's an echo, the ocean's answering itself." The shape kept rising. The readings failed to define it. The sonar simply bled white, saturated by reflections too dense to resolve. One thing was certain. It was moving against gravity, toward the ice, toward us. Reyes reached for the emergency ballast release. "We'll blow tanks, rocket to the surface." I grabbed his wrist. "If the shaft collapses, we're entombed." "Better that than—" He didn't finish. A deep vibration rolled through the ocean. Not sound, not motion, pressure fluctuation, like a heartbeat spread through liquid kilometers wide. Then we heard it. A sound through the comms. Faint, distorted, layered like a recording of our own voices played backward through water. "Bring it home." It was my voice, but wrong. Reyes went pale. "That was you. It was you." Quan's monitor erupted in static. Lines of code appeared on her display, characters flickering faster than the processor could produce them. They weren't random. The strings repeated our mission timestamps, then personal identifiers, then fragments of earlier transmissions. I realized what it was doing, passing us, learning us, rebuilding us in real time. Quan whispered, "It's inside the signal net." That was when Endurance 9 moved. The sub's thrusters powered on by themselves. It rotated, slow and graceful, as if awakening. Our floodlights caught the observation blister, and something pressed against the glass from inside. Something with no clear outline, only the impression of movement under translucent film. A smear of shadows that looked disturbingly like fingers. "Cut the tether!" I shouted. Rhea severed the lariat. Endurance 9 didn't sink. It hovered beside us, perfectly buoyant, hull intact, lights still pulsing in our rhythm. Then it began to drift upward, on its own, following the shaft we'd come down. "Impossible," Quan said. "No power signature, no thermal bloom. It's not burning anything." We fired Ariadne's thrusters and followed. The ascent was slow at first, then the sub accelerated. Currents rose with it, vertical, spiraling, pushing particulate into violent spirals. I tightened my harness and watched our altitude climb. The ocean above dimmed, shadowed by ice clouds. Then the signal returned, louder, clearer. Not through the radios, through the hull again, through the water itself. We remember, we remember, we remember. Each repetition warped, pitch and timbre sliding toward perfect imitation of us. Quan's breathing quickened. "It's echoing. The ice has memory. That's what the reflections are. Sound fossilized, replayed." But it wasn't just sound anymore. The filaments we'd seen earlier were everywhere now, descending from the ceiling like strands of translucent nerve. They trailed into Endurance 9's hull, merging with it, vanishing beneath its panels. We broke the first kilometer mark. The shaft walls began to tremble. Ice dust rained into the water in thin clouds. "Surface control, come in," I shouted. "We're on ascent with the sub, do you read?" Static. Then faintly, crackling, a whisper of voices. "Copy that, Ariadne. Welcome home." It was my own voice again, word for word, the phrase I'd spoken 2 hours earlier when Reyes returned from a maintenance dive. Reyes stared at me through his visor. That wasn't the surface. The realization hit in pieces. The voice had come from below. The sonar confirmed it. A reflected signature matching Ariadne's comm profile trailing beneath us by less than 20 meters. Something else was talking using our equipment. Quan turned the external cameras downward. For a moment, the feed was empty. Then we saw them. 3 faint silhouettes gliding in formation beneath us, each identical in mass and outline to our own suits, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. Our ghosts. My stomach clenched. That's sonar echo. But even as I said it, one of the shadows raised its hand. We hadn't. And a second later, the hull lights of Ariadne blinked, once for each of us. The same gesture, the same rhythm, a say. Perfect imitation. The ice above shuddered, cracking along invisible seams. The temperature sensors spiked and fell, spiked again. The world around us seemed to pulse. The last thing I remember before everything went white was Quan whispering a single word through the static. Learning. Then came the impact. A flash, a roar, and silence so deep it erased thought. When the whiteout cleared, we weren't where physics said we should be. Ariadne rested at a tilt inside a chamber that hadn't existed on any scan. The walls were ice, but not solid. Layered sheets, translucent like stacked panes of cloudy glass. Our floodlights pushed no farther than a few meters before the layers caught and scattered them. It looked built, even though I knew that was the wrong word. The chamber had formed around us the way sea foam knits around a rock. Reyes groaned. "Status." "Alive," I said. My tongue tasted metal. Frame flexed but intact, thrusters cold, power at 70. Quan was already working. "We dropped less than 10 meters," she said, eyes moving across her tablet. Everything above the shaft interface refroze. There's no open water above us now. A beat. It closed the door. The phrase sat between us until I forced myself to move. The chamber's ceiling was an irregular dome. Hairline seams curved along it like growth rings, and from those seams descended threads. Those same filaments, finer than wire, shifting just enough to prove they weren't frozen. They didn't glow. They took light, thin as the scratches a needle leaves on glass. I fixed our exterior mic gain and tapped the hull with a gloved knuckle. The sound came back wrong. Not the sharp ping of steel in water, but a padded thump, delayed, as if the ice had swallowed it and considered its options before returning a version it preferred. Quan raised a hand. Listen. At first, I heard only our breaths and the soft tick of cooling metal. Then a murmur at the edge of perception resolved into words. Bring it home. Not my voice now, my father's. Not exactly, but enough to punch the air from my lungs. The cadence, the pause he always left after the first word when he was trying not to raise hope. Reyes swore. It's pulling from personal profiles. From us, Quan said. From anything we've ever fed through the system, the ice stores pressure histories. We assumed passive storage. It isn't passive. I focused on the work. Work is narrower than fear. We cut our way up, microborer in short pulses, low heat so we don't trigger collapse. We extended the borer. The first pulse hissed into the ceiling, a clean cone of melt. The second pulse sounded different. The borer's tone came back doubled, then tripled, overlapping interference that settled into a rhythm I recognized with dread. The ice was answering the tool, finding its frequency, meeting it halfway. The third pulse died inside the machine as if something soft had been packed into the feed. Stop, Quan said. The hole we'd made in the ceiling sealed itself, not instantly, not like a trick, but through a slow recongealing that reminded me of skin closing over a shallow cut. The edges drew inward. A faint halo bled into the ice around it, an afterimage of our heat that didn't fade. The halo pulsed, once, twice, then again in the beat of our respiration loop. It remembers and it imitates, Quan said softly. Like a palimpsest, each event writes over the last one, but traces remain. Then those traces get reorganized. Reyes flexed his fingers. The back of his glove showed a dark smear where one filament had touched it earlier. Now that smear had resolved into branching lines, delicate and tree-like, as if a frost had grown into the material. He noticed me staring and forced a grin too wide for the situation. Souvenir. Don't joke, I said. Sealant over that now. He did. The sealant beaded on the surface, resisted, then sank as if reluctant. When the layer set, the frost pattern ghosted up through it again, faint but persistent. The ice outside us pulsed once more. I turned the hull camera toward the sub trapped beside us. Endurance 9 faced the chamber wall, observation blister inches from ice. Its interior lights still cycled through that seabed green. I saw movement inside, and for a blink I thought I was looking at a person bending past the console. The shape wasn't human. It had no joints. It flowed into the corners and then back out, like liquid pressed under a pane. Quan's voice was thin. It's using our hardware as scaffolding. Then we amputate, Reyes said. Kill the sub. Power drain. Hard. I hesitated. We are not sure what is on the same circuit. Everything is on the same circuit, he said, including us. He wasn't wrong. Europa had taught us humility. Any current you put out here ran back through places you didn't predict. We patched into Endurance 9's power bus. The sub didn't resist. The drawer collapsed to nothing under my hand like a throat relaxing. The lights stayed on. That's not possible, I said. It doesn't need our power anymore, Quan said. It learned a way around it. She held the tablet out. Look at this. She'd plotted the chamber's pressure data over the last minute. The line wasn't random noise. It was a waveform as clean as a lab signal. Our lab signal, the calibration phrase we spoke at the start of every dive. The one we'd made into a ritual to prove to ourselves we were still human. The chamber was speaking in the shape of it, not words, the pressure shape of words. The external mic caught another voice, not a voice. A message pressed through a medium that hated us. It layered over itself until meaning resolved. Open, open, open. Open what? Reyes said. The ice to starboard shifted, not cracked, shifted the way a diaphragm flexes. The layers in the wall staggered by a millimeter, enough to reveal dark between them. The filaments lifted like grass in a current and pointed, not at the sub, at Ariadne's service hatch. I felt an impulse to obey that was almost physical. You don't ignore alarms, you don't ignore indicator arrows. Engineering is a long apprenticeship to the religion of follow the sign. I had to force my hands still. No, I said. We do not open our hull because a war asked. Quan nodded, relief in the small motion. Agreed. The chamber dimmed. Our lights were steady, but their reach shortened, as if the water had thickened again. My visor displayed a contact icon that shouldn't exist. External handshake request, local, wrong protocol. The origin field populated with 3 names: mine, Reyes, Quan. The system believed we were being hailed by ourselves. Deny, I said. The icon persisted. It added a 4th name, Endurance 9, then a 5th, Ariadne, then our station's name, the one on the borehole tower above. It kept adding until the list became a blur of identifiers we knew. Old mission tags, the name of the test tank back at JPL, my engineering lab at Purdue, the basement room where I built my first transmitter. The headset hummed with that slow, sea-wet scrape. Quan swallowed. It's extending a network. The filaments brushed the blister again. The smear on Reyes's glove pulsed in answer. He hissed, shook his hand as if stung. The frost pattern had deepened. It wasn't on the glove anymore. It had grown through to the inner layer. When he flexed his fingers, the pattern flexed too, as if it had learned his tendons. We need a clean line to the surface, I said. We need a human voice that isn't us, reissued. We had one option left, the emergency spool in the payload bay, 1,000 meters of hardline optical, meant for when the relay failed. We could lace it through the shaft if we could bite a path. Reyes with me, I said. Quan, keep eyes on Endurance 9. If it moves toward the hatch, you scream. We unlatched and crabbed our way along the frame to the payload bay. As I popped the panel, something brushed my helmet. I looked up. A filament hung there, weightless and curious. It tapped the faceplate with the soft insistence of a moth at a window. I forced myself not to flinch. The filament left a faint fogging where it touched. The fog clung, coiled inward, and formed lines that looked like writing until you focused, and the shapes fell apart into nonsense. The emergency spool was there, intact. I grabbed the lead and fed it toward the ceiling. The ice opened another millimeter, an invitation like lips parting. The lead slid in, and for a dangerous second, I let myself believe this would work, that the ice would accept our line like a catheter and carry it to air. Then, Endurance 9 rotated. No thruster flash, no disturbance. It just turned to face us, observation blister reflecting 3 helmet lights and a suggestion of a 4th, inches from my shoulder where no one floated. The blister fogged from the inside, and on that fog I saw finger trails trace letters in a slow, clumsy hand. It was my handwriting. It wrote one word. Open, Reyes whispered. That's your O. The way you close it too soon. Quan's voice came tight. It's not showing that on my feed. Of course it wasn't. It was for me. The chamber wants the thing you can least afford to give. I let the lead slip from my hand. It hung there, half swallowed by the seam, quivering on some breath too big to see. "New plan," I said. My voice was calm because terror had nowhere left to go. "We leave the sub. We back Ariadne into the seam and push. We break whatever soft tissue this is and ride the refreeze as a wedge. We do not engage with the network." Reyes stared at the frost branching under his sealant. "And if it learns that plan too?" "It will," I said. "We move before it finishes." The chamber heard me. I know how that sounds, but the filaments lifted as one, and the pressure curve on Kwan's tablet rose in a slow wave that made my molars ache. From somewhere deep in the ice came a sound like a breathing apparatus taking a long, patient inhale. "Welcome, home," the chamber said, in my father's voice, in my instructor's voice, in my own voice folded back on itself, until meaning and comfort were the same shape, and both were traps. We powered the thrusters. The seam widened a fraction. The ice pushed back. And above us, far away but unmistakable, a human voice cut through the interference. "Ariadne, this is surface. Do not open your hatch." I wanted to believe her. I still do. But the signature line below the message wasn't our controller's call sign, it was mine. Hearing my own call sign coming from the surface was like seeing your name on a headstone. The syllables fit, but everything else was wrong. The message carried the right compression, the right hiss of our borehole relay, even the faint buzz from a faulty transformer I'd been meaning to replace. It was perfect. That's what made it impossible. Kwan muted the channel with a hard stab of her finger. "We treat everything on comms as hostile until proven otherwise." "Agreed," I said, and I felt relief wash through me at the sound of my own voice inside my helmet. Not the replayed version, not the softened cadence the chamber preferred. Mine. Tired. Edged. Real. We backed Ariadne into position beneath the seam. The seam waited, lips barely parted, filaments poised like hairs sensing a change in air. I set the thrusters for a slow thrust so we wouldn't cavitate against the ceiling and risk getting folded into the ice. We needed pressure, not violence. Wedge and hold. Let the structure around us fail on our terms instead of its. "Reyes," I said, "lock the frame braces. Keep our nose up when it starts to close." He moved his hand. The frost pattern under the sealant pulsed in sync with his motion, a ghostly echo of tendon and vein. He noticed, swallowed, and worked anyway. Good man. We all chose to ignore what was happening to him because we needed to. That's how systems fail. Not with one big error, but with a list you promised to address after lunch. Kwan's eyes stayed on Endurance 9. "If it shifts toward the hatch, I'll dump the ballast on the sub and pin it." Her mouth was a thin line. "We don't let it touch us again." I eased Ariadne upward. The seam resisted like cartilage. The frame vibrated. I felt the pushback in my teeth. A high, almost musical shiver that grew until it was all I could hear. The filaments bent around the hull. Where they touched, a pallor spread across the paint, a frost burn that traced long, branching lines. The ice above us flexed, then, with an almost surgical neatness, gave. We entered a conduit no wider than our frame. The walls weren't rough, they were smooth, laminated in micro-layers that made our lights ripple in bands. The conduit tightened around our hull until the velocity went to 0 and the sound in my teeth jumped to a lower note, like a cello string being tuned down. The nose of Ariadne wedged. The seam tried to close. We held. "Brace engaged," Reyes said. "Frame is biting." "Hold thrust," I said. "Short pulses, 2 seconds on, 2 off." We pushed. The seam relented by millimeters. Each millimeter cost heat and power. From the chamber behind us came the faint scrape of glass. I turned a camera back. Endurance 9 had rotated again, aligning its observation blister with our service hatch. The blister fogged. Letters traced, slow and clumsy. not mine this time. Reyes. He stared. That's not how I write it. It's how your mother wrote. It on your flight certificate, Kwan said without looking. She'd seen the photo. We all had, taped above his bunk. The chamber was rummaging, reorganizing, performing the digital equivalent of opening drawers and leaving the contents in neat, mocking stacks. Eyes forward, I said. Reyes, breathe with me. In, out, 2 seconds. He matched my rhythm. The frost branching under his sealant slowed, not stopped, slowed. A systems engineer's prayer. If you can't fix it, modulate it. The conduit ahead kinked. It shouldn't have. A path like this should follow thermal gradients, not angles. But we weren't inside geology anymore. We were inside something that used geology like muscle uses bone. Kwan's tablet pinged. The pressure curve in the conduit rose in a gentle arc, threatening our hull tolerance if it kept going. I'd seen that shape before. It was the curve you get when a pressure regulator valve opens downstream of a clogged filter. The ocean was managing us the way a life support system manages a patient. Careful, watchful, cruel by kindness. Shorten pulses, I said. 1 second on, 3 off. Save heat. We pushed, the kink unspooled by a fraction, then held as if amused by our effort. That was when the surface spoke again. Ariadne, this is control. Read you with heavy attenuation. Your sub is showing thermal runaway. Open your hatch and vent the bay. The voice was Gloria's, our real controller. The same clipped vowels, the same impatience she wore like a tool. Kwan's hand hovered over the mute, then withdrew. It knows her too, she said. It's not random. Gloria's voice continued. You're at risk of cascade failure. Open, now. 2 words I will not forget as long as I breathe. Open, now. Words you obey before you think. Emergency words. The kind that bypass training and go straight to muscle. I stared at the hatch control. It sat there, blessedly boring, the same size and position it had always been, an engineer's anchor in chaos. No, I said aloud to a thing that had never needed permission. Not your command, not your voice. The conduit trembled as if I'd insulted a host. The filaments stroked the hull. Kwan flinched. New signal, she said, and patched it through before I could object, because she wanted proof too. We all did. Humans will put their hand on the stove twice if the first burn didn't fit the model. A sound came through, unlike the others. Not voice, not scrape. Wet and rhythmic, like peristalsis amplified through kilometers of tissue. Between contractions, a faint tapping, measured, patient, like someone in the next room asking to be let in by rapping on your shared wall. It knows we're wedged, Kwan whispered. Reyes hissed through his teeth. He touched his wrist where the frost lay under the sealant. It's getting cold. Temperature? I asked. Inside the glove, he said. There was no sensor for that. I believed him anyway. I opened the payload bay again and stared at the emergency spool lead, still embedded in the seam behind us. The conduit flexed minutely around it, as if tasting. If we could keep pushing and keep that line seated, it might reach the borehole. If anyone human was still at the top, if any of this connected to reality, we could get a message out that hadn't been revised by ice. Reyes, I said. When I say, you feed the spool. He nodded, jaw tight. Frost branched a little deeper. We pushed. The kink softened. 3 centimeters forward, then 5. Enough to believe in. The chamber behind us answered progress with a new trick. The observation blister on Endurance 9 went black, as if a hand had placed itself against the glass from the inside. The black spread until the entire blister was an eye. In that polished darkness, 3 reflections hung. Our helmets and a 4th shape, tall, skinny, located between Reyes and me where no one floated. The 4th reflection turned its head. When it did, the frost under Reyes's sealant turned with it. Don't look, I said, and looked anyway, because that's what people do. The fourth reflection had my outline and something else behind it, like a rip in the water showing deeper water. The conduit ahead brightened by a shade, a change as subtle as hope. We were nearly to a junction where the path widened to the diameter of the borehole proper. Once there, we could power straight up until the pumps starved, or the tower itself failed. A plan made of friction and electricity and stubbornness, the only kind I trust. "Now," I said. Reyes fed the spool. The line slid into the seam with a satisfaction that felt obscene. On my panel, the optical handshake blinked, just a flicker, then another, then a lock. I exhaled a laugh that wasn't joy. "We have line." "Say something they can't fake," Quan said. "Something only the surface knows." I pressed my visor to the mic and spoke a phrase that no algorithm could conjure. A private joke Gloria had made about a pressure regulator 2 missions ago. The wrong number she'd muttered in frustration that I'd repeated back until she smiled. Stupid, human, unreasonable. I said it like a password across a cold sea. Static answered. Then, faint, a woman's voice. "Copy!" Not Gloria. Another controller. A tech I barely knew, the one who never spoke unless spoken to. She added in a rush that made my throat ache. "Hold. Do not open. We're seeing a duplicate of your feed topside. It's here." The last word hung. Here. Not down with us. Up there. The conduit convulsed. The lock on the optical lead chirped red. The filament cluster around the line turned milky, losing their transparency, as if the ice had secreted a sheath around the cable. "It's choking the line," Quan said. "Pull," I said, but the lead wouldn't budge. It had already set. A new pressure wave rolled down the conduit toward us. The curve on Quan's tablet steepened into something ugly, no longer a regulator easing open, but a valve snapping shut. The seam we were wedged in began to close with intent. "Thrusters full," I said. "Braces to maximum." Ariadne groaned. The frame flexed, but held. The junction was close enough to feel the water change, the way air changes near an open door. We clawed for it in half-centimeter bites, while the seam tried to make us part of it. Behind us, Endurance 9 drifted. The blister turned away. The black inside receded like a pupil constricting. On the fogging glass, a final word traced itself in the same wrong hand as before, the letters too careful, like a child copying. "Home." "I don't live here," I said, and pushed the thrusters into the red. The seam crushed in, hissed around our hull, and then, with a sound like a rib cracking, gave. We shot forward into the wider conduit, Ariadne bucking, the filaments flailing like jellyfish tentacles in our wake. We were moving, up, toward a borehole that might be real or might be another mouth. The optical lock flickered green one last time. "Ariadne, if you can hear us," the quiet tech's voice said, sounding like a person holding back a sob. "Your tower just..." The line went dead. We climbed into a dark that was suddenly, impossibly, full of snow. The snow wasn't snow. Under our floods it glittered like frost, but the flakes were too regular, thin hexagons, each with a faint dark core. They drifted and turned and clung to the hull, and wherever they touched the paint, a pale print remained, as if a ghost fingertip had pressed there. Quan whispered, "Shedding layers." "From the ice?" I asked. "From us," she said. "Everything we've done down here leaves patterns. It sloughs them like skin." We climbed. The conduit widened and rose, then split. 3 ways, all narrow, all vertical, each the right diameter, each reflecting our lights back with the same slick sheen of new melt. The optical lead was dead. The pumps above, if any pumps still existed, were silent. Nothing told us which path was ours. Reyes flexed his right hand. The frost branching beneath his sealant had thickened into pale veins. "Pick one," he said, and tried for a grin that didn't land. He shivered. I'm colder than I should be. Quan glanced at me. I didn't say what we were both thinking. If the thing had found a way into his glove's micro-tears, the cold he felt wasn't environmental. It was inside. We fell back to the only thing the ocean seemed slow to counterfeit. Dumb hardware. Not software filters, not semantic matches, metal and wire and simple inductance. When we cut the shaft, we embedded fiducial pins, nickel rods at fixed intervals, into the wall to track melt rate and deformation. The real shaft should carry a faint, staggered magnetic field signature you could read with a coil and an honest voltmeter. Salvage coil from thruster 3, I said. Strip it, wend it tight, 40 turns. Reyes, can you... He was already at it, hands steady because the alternative to steadiness was panic. The snow swarmed his glove when he exposed the wire, clinging to the copper as if it remembered the shape. He ignored it, finished the coil, and passed it to me. I clipped it to the utility bus, set the voltmeter, and moved the coil across the walls of the first vertical shaft. Nothing. The needle twitched at random, then settled. The second shaft gave a soft, rhythmic tick, hope rising. Then the tick organized into our own thruster pulse pattern, and I swore and pulled away. The ice is replaying us, Quan said. Anything we do, it does back. What about the third? Reyes asked. I dragged the coil along the third shaft. The meter crept in tiny, stubborn steps. Not our pulse, not an echo. Step, step, pause, step, longer pause. Then again. The interval between steps matched the spacing of the pins we'd sunk, not the neat spacing in our model, but the warped spacing we'd measured after the shaft settled. Imperfect. Human. Ours. That one, I said. Go. We pushed into the third shaft. The snow thickened, spinning into slow cyclones around our floods. In the beam, I saw some flakes weren't blank. Their dark cores carried tiny branching, threads like electrical traces under varnish. When they hit the viewport, they stuck, and sometimes a pattern flashed through them. Glimpses, the curve of Gloria's mouth when she was about to cut me off, the smudge of coffee I'd wiped from a panel on day 2, Reyes at 20 with both arms up after a dive, frozen in victory. Not memory as images, memory as pressure contours, reissued as light. Don't look, I said, too late for all of us. We climbed into another split, then another. Each time I ran the coil and hunted for the broken staircase of our pins. Twice the meter lied. Twice the shaft answered with a perfect version of us, like a mirror that fixes your face. Both times we backed out. On the third lie, the meter gave me my own father's voice in a scratchy tape hiss, spliced from who knows where to whisper the right choice. I killed the power to the voltmeter and used it anyway because I needed to hold something that was still a tool. This isn't mapping, Quan said. This is immune response. It's surrounding stimulus and presenting a safe copy. Safe for who? Reyes asked, and winced as the veins under his sealant pulsed. It's burning. How bad? I asked. He hesitated. It's spreading, he said, and then, quieter. I can feel it learning my hand. When I move, it anticipates. Quan dug in her kit, pulled a microheat strip, and wrapped it around the glove at the wrist. The strip glowed dull red. The frost retreated a shade, then regrouped. It didn't melt. It reorganized. We both saw it. Neither of us looked at the other. Keep moving, I said, because moving was the only metric we had left. The shaft we chose then opened suddenly, like stepping out of a stairwell into a silo. The walls here were smoother, less layered. Our floods stretched farther. I recognized scoring in the ice, faint spirals, the signature of the Melthead's descent. We had found our borehole, or a version of it convincing enough to sell to my tired brain. Quan's tablet pinged. Pressure above is lower. The pumps. Something up there is still evacuating. Or it wants us to think so, Reyes said. Either way, it's up, I said. And up is the only direction that isn't here. We started a steady ascent. The snow thickened again, not in flakes now, but in filaments so fine they read as haze. It looked like dust motes in a sunbeam, except we were 2 miles under ice and nothing here had ever seen a sun. A sound came down the shaft, a distant mechanical chop, almost like a helicopter filtered through miles of water. Not possible. I recognized it anyway. The bore pump's impeller when air rails through the intake. It meant cavitation. It meant the reservoir above the melt head was low. It meant we were close. "Surface," Quan said, excitement bleeding into dread. "We're almost—" "Don't," I said. "Not until we touch air." We pushed those last meters through, water that had turned to syrup. The filaments dragged on the hull, found the edges of panels, lingered on the service door. Twice an alert flashed. Hatch access requested. Twice I denied it with a curse I would never say in a clean room. Then the dark brightened in a way even I trust. Not color, quality. Water in motion above us took on that loose clarity that means space, not conduit. We came into an open cavity, and I saw the borehead skirt hanging from the ice like the bell of a drowned flower. Beyond it, a lake of meltwater sloshed against pale walls. We were at the bottom of our shaft. "Up through the skirt," I said. "Slowly. It's thin." The skirt shivered as the filaments touched it. For a terrifying instant, the polymer took a print of their pattern, and I thought the whole bell would take on a memory and close. It didn't. We slipped under, into the melt lake, and the world changed. The sound expanded. The pressure eased. The water carried a faint chemical tang, the antifreeze we'd bled to keep the shaft open. I almost cried at the stink. The pump noise above shifted to a clean whir. The snow thinned to a grey veil. We rose along the center line. The walls here were glassy, striated, the melt lines the color of old teeth. Every few meters a nickel pin gleamed where it had shifted free of its socket. The coil meter in my lap ticked in that crooked heartbeat that had gotten us here. Then, halfway to the surface, a glow bloomed below us. I turned a camera down. In the water we'd just left, the filaments had knit themselves into a tube, a second skirt blossoming in our wake. Inside that tube, something moved with a human rhythm. 3 silhouettes rose, perfectly spaced, hands at their sides, helmets catching the faint reflection of our floods. Our ghosts had followed us into the shaft. "They can't fit through the skirt," Quan said, like a wish spoken aloud becomes a rule. The new skirt bowed inward, then dilated with soft insistence, an orifice learning a shape. The silhouettes lifted their hands and reached for the seam. They didn't push. They waited. We gunned the thrusters. The pump noise above intensified. 30 meters, 20. Ice hummed through the frame. My teeth hurt. "Surface," I said, unable to stop myself. "If you're real, if anyone human is on that deck, you answer to this." I pulsed the thrusters in a pattern I'd taught my team the first week. A stupid rhythm we clapped when we were too tired to talk. Primes spaced in a way that makes machines stutter and humans laugh. 2, 3, 5, 7, broken beats that never settle. For a second, only water answered. Then, far above, the pump coughed in exactly that rhythm. It wasn't our device, it wasn't precise, but it was late by a human amount, ragged, like a person slapping a control in time with a prayer. Quan choked out a laugh that sounded like pain. "They're there." "Or it is," Reyes said, voice thin. He looked at his glove. The frost pattern was at his elbow now. When he moved, the veins didn't just anticipate, they led. We broke the surface of the melt lake. The bore tower's pipework crowded the space like the ribs of something giant. The air was a thin breath, sharp with propylene and steel. Above, a hatch ringed by floodlights promised a way out and a place to scream. The first of the 3 silhouettes reached the base of the skirt below and pressed a palm into the polymer. The impression of a hand formed, held, and didn't fade. "Ariadne," a voice called from the hatch above. Not mine, not Gloria's, the quiet tech, breathless, human. "Do not open your service door. Do not..." Something banged against the tower, metal on metal. Once, twice, then 7 times, each knock spaced like we'd taught it. The snow began to fall from the ceiling. Not flakes now, ash. It touched the water and bloomed into little clouds that reached for our hull. We were back in air. We were almost home. And we had brought something with us that thinks home means inside. We floated under the tower's ribs, a steel forest gone pale with ice. The hatch above was an eye of hard light. Air moved around us in a thin draft that smelled like antifreeze and fear. The quiet tech spoke again, voice shaking but trained. "Do not open your service door. Rig for winch. We'll bring you up inside the quarantine collar." Her tone saved me. Procedure held. Procedure is a rope in black water. "Copy," I said. "Winch hook ready. We're hands off on the door." Quan locked the hook to the bow clevis with a motion so neat it hurt to watch, like seeing someone tie a bow for a child who isn't coming home. Reyes didn't speak. He curled his left arm across his chest as if cradling it. The frost had crept under his elbow ring and was pushing toward the bicep seal. The veins beneath had stopped looking like frost and started looking like pale vines. When he flexed, they flexed a heartbeat early, as if correcting him. The winch motor engaged above with a groan that shot up my spine like a promise. Cable lowered, glittering with melt. The hook found our clevis. The line went tight. We rose. Below us, the second skirt ballooned inward again, and then peeled open with obscene delicacy. A gloved hand emerged, then an arm, then a helmet, all wrong in little ways. Limbs a hair too long, posture too even. The faceplate showed a reflection of our floods, but no face. The silhouette lifted one hand and laid it on the underside of the polymer skirt, palm to membrane, like a diver at an aquarium wall. The tower shook with 7 knocks. The pump coughed in the prime rhythm again and then steadied, as if someone topside had slapped it back into line while praying not to be imitated. "Quarantine collar is down," the tech said. "You'll feel a seal." A ring descended around the melt lake, a heavy gasketed cylinder that mated to the skirt with a heavy, wet thump. The ring had ports around its circumference, steam injectors, ultraviolet emitters, hot brine nozzles. All the ugly tools we swore we'd use without hesitation and secretly hoped we'd never need. "Sequence Bravo," I said. "Confirmed," she answered. "On your mark." I looked at Quan. She nodded. Reyes stared at the frost under his seal. I could not read his eyes. Mark. Heat hit us through the water in a soft bloom that grew teeth. Steam rolled from the injectors and churned the lake into opaque milk. Ultraviolet flared, a color you feel under your tongue more than see. The brine jets kicked and salted the world. Temperature climbed again, plateaued just under the range where our seals would fail. "Hold it," I said. "No more." The milk thinned. The hand under the skirt was gone. The 3 silhouettes below had retreated out of our light, or erased themselves so cleanly that they were no longer calculated by the water around them. I wanted to believe they had dissolved. Belief is a poor instrument. The winch lifted us into the throat of the quarantine collar. Water sluiced off the hull. The collar's inner doors irised and sealed around Ariadne like lips around a straw. The noise changed to a wet thunder that meant pumps hitting capacity. The chamber drained. The first breath of air in 2 miles hurt. The humidity inside the collar was a soup. Antifreeze vapors stung my eyes through the visor. When the water dropped below our viewports, I saw the collar walls clearly. They looked wrong. Micro-crazing, like hairline fractures in safety glass, spidered across every surface. And in those fractures, a faint paleness gathered. the same branching I had watched grow under Reyes's sealant. "Surface," I said. "You built this collar out of stainless. It doesn't craze." A breath on the channel. "It didn't," she said. The floor under us clanged as the cradle latched. Mechanical hands, the only hands I wanted to feel, locked our frame and began to draw us up into the transfer chamber. Steam followed us, then burned away in a fug of hot air and chemical kill. "Remain sealed," the tech said. "We pressurize the chamber and then flood with dry nitrogen. No oxygen until we get a clean spectro. If anything taps, you don't answer." "Understood," Quan said. "Nods don't count," Reyes said, and tried to smile. It came out twisted. His left hand tightened without permission, a slow, white-knuckled squeeze that made him grunt. I toggled local intercom. "Reyes, look at me." He looked. The veins under his seal moved again, lazy and sure, like something stretching after a nap. "We're getting you into the medical lock," I said. "We'll purge the glove, then the arm. Heat, vacuum, the whole regimen. We'll cut that pattern out of you like a tumor." "You don't cut pattern," he said. "Pattern cuts you." "Stop helping," I said, and he actually laughed, then bit down on it. The cradle carried us into the transfer chamber. Bars of white light tracked across the deck in clinical sweeps. 3 figures waited there in suits, the hard-shell kind we used when we were serious about not dying. One of them was the quiet tech. Her name refused to come when I searched for it, as if the ice had overwritten my head with more relevant tables. I held on to the shape of her face. Tired, determined, real. She keyed the intercom. "Nobody opens anything until the analyzer says friendly. You stay on your loop. We'll bring the lock to you." Quan raised a hand in a small wave. The tech flinched, then mirrored it deliberately, as if proving to herself she could move at a human lag. The analyzer chirped. The panel over the chamber door flashed green, then yellow, then green again, as the instruments argued with themselves and settled on a compromise. "Minimal volatile signature," the tech said, reading. "No organics above background, no unexpected ions." She swallowed. "No ghosts on the spectro." A weak joke offered like bread. "Bring the arm lock," I said. They rolled a narrow vestibule on rails to mate with our service hatch. The lock would grip our door, make its own space, slice our environment from theirs. The tech worked the controls with cautious hands. The vestibule kissed our hull. Seals engaged. Gauges twitched and found home. "Ready," she said. "On your mark." I looked at the hatch. The icon flashed across my visor again. "Hatch access requested." It looked so normal there that for a second I felt only gratitude. Then the hairs on my neck lifted. "Who requested?" I asked. "Me," said the tech. "Manual handshake in the lock. That's the only way this works." The icon changed. The request now showed 2 identifiers, the tech's code and mine. "I didn't touch it," I said. Quan whispered, "It's writing on your interface again." My hands hovered over the controls. Procedure. I spoke the arm-length safety mantra out loud, each step forcing my breath into the right pattern. Depressurize vestibule. Hard vac for 5 seconds. Warm brine pulse. Dry nitrogen flood. Confirm equalization. Verify mechanical interlock. "Depressurizing," the tech said. I watched the vestibule pressure fall. It went to a clean 0 and held. The brine wash hit. The nitrogen flowed. The gauges steadied. I forced myself to look at Reyes. "It wants in, not out," he said. "It wants room." "We're not giving it," I said, and toggled the last interlock. The hatch unlatched with its familiar thud. A smell climbed into my helmet that didn't belong. Not rot, not sea. A faint, dry scent like paper that has been stored in a cold attic for a very long time. The hairs on my arms went up so hard it felt like being touched. "Glove first," I said. "Slide into the lock. Keep your arm straight." Reyes obeyed. He pushed his left hand into the vestibule. The frost pattern under his sealant leaped to meet the pressure change with greedy grace. The veins pulled toward the open space as if the lock were a magnet. He whimpered. "Hold," I said. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The tech slammed the inner door. The lock sucked what it could. The analyzer screamed, not with a value but with an error tone that sells panic. The panel popped to red. The tech cursed. It learned the lock. It's dampening the reading. "Vac again," I said. "Longer." We pulled again. The veins under the sealant shrank, retreated in a motion that looked so hungry it made my stomach turn. A filigree of paleness etched along the lock's inner wall, as if frost were mapping the pressure gradient. The analyzer found numbers. Organic trace spiked, then fell, then stabilized at a level that made the tech breathe again. "Cut the glove," I said. She worked fast with a tool that looked like a delicate guillotine. The glove split. A bloom of fine, pale dust drifted up in the lock, then sank like it had changed its mind about gravity. Reyes yanked his arm back on reflex. I grabbed his forearm. He was shaking in deep waves. "Again," he said through clenched teeth. "Do it again." "We will," I said, and meant it. "We will, until your blood is yours." Quan made a small, strangled sound. I turned. The quarantine collar wall behind the tech had developed a wet shadow, a pale handprint at shoulder height. No one had touched it. As we watched, another handprint formed next to it, fingers splayed. Then a third, lower, palm small, like a child's. The tech saw our faces and turned. She held very still. Her voice, when it came, sounded like it had been ironed flat. "That's not us." The chamber lights dimmed by a hair. The pumps faltered and caught. The analyzer buzzed and reset. On the shaft camera, the melt lake below, now emptied to a gleam, wore a film. The film stirred where no air moved. "They rode the vapor," Quan said. "Into the collar, into the walls. We boiled them, and they changed state." "Can you flood the chamber with dry nitrogen again?" I asked. The tech nodded and reached. The handprints on the wall pressed harder, halos deepening around each palm. The metal beneath them creaked like bone. "Nitrogen on," she said. The vents hissed. The air went thin and hot and dry. The handprints faded. The metal sighed. "Again," I said. "Already cycling," she said. Reyes whispered very softly, "It wants us to teach it." I closed my eyes for a heartbeat and saw the coil meter ticking in crooked trust, the prime knocks on the pump housing, the skirt opening like a mouth that had learned how. It wanted a vocabulary. We were writing the dictionary on our way up the throat of a world. "Listen to me," I said, to Reyes, to Quan, to the tech, to myself. "We are not its teachers. We are not its home. We finish the purge. We close the hatch. We weld this lock shut if we have to, and we get to real air under real sky." "There is no sky," Quan said. "Then we fake one," I said, and gestured to the tech. "Purge again." She reached. The wall behind her bulged. Not much. Enough to shift the light. On the shaft camera, the empty melt lake rippled. A filament rose from its center like a tendril looking for sun. The filament rising from the emptied melt lake was thin enough to miss if you didn't want to see it. It lifted to the height of a person and hesitated, as if listening for weather that doesn't exist down here. Our shaft camera struggled with the depth of field and turned the thing into a bright hair that wouldn't settle. "Close the collar," I said. "Hard seals. No gas exchanges unless I say." The quiet tech worked the panel. The quarantine collar's lips cinched with a hydraulic groan that made my jaw ache. The vents shut. The nitrogen cycle cut off mid-hiss. The handprints on the wall bled at the edges, then held. Quan stared at the filament on the camera. "It's probing memory space." "Translate," Reyes said, voice thin. She didn't look away. We gave it vocabulary, pressure gradients, thermal edges, the taste of brine and nitrogen. Now it's testing where the borders of those words are. It will find a way to write us in our own alphabet, I said. Before it does, we erase as much as we can. The tech finished one more nitrogen cycle for principle, then sealed the valves and their dogged human habit of letting metal cool before the next tempering pass. She looked at me through her visor. You still have to come out. We can't treat him through the hatch forever. Not until we've sterilized what is touching us, I said. Another pass on the arm. Reyes nodded without looking. He slid his forearm back into the lock. The veins under the sealant reacted like roots in wind. The analyzer stayed steady this time, as if the first purge had taught the invader how to hide inside the measurement. The tech cut again, higher this time, and a sheet of inner glove peeled away with a sound too close to skin. Pale dust floated in the vestibule, and then, instead of settling, drifted toward a seam where the rails met the floor. It vanished into the crack with a deliberate patience that made all of us step back in our own cages. Again, Reyes said, jaw trembling. Keep going. We stop at the suit ring, I said. Past that is blood. I know where it is, he said, more gentle than I deserved. The filament on the camera rose another hand's width and then bowed, a careful nod to no one. On the quarantine wall, the handprints pressed again. The metal beneath each palm deformed a fraction. A dimple forming not from heat but from pressure distributed across space, in a way I couldn't have simulated if you gave me a month and access to a supercomputer. This thing didn't need strength. It had leverage inside the structure of our world. Kwan took a breath that clicked in her mic. There's a pattern in the handprints. Spare me, Reyes whispered. He was white around the mouth. Not art, she said. Spacing. The distance between the centers matches the spacing of our fiducial pins in the shaft, including the drift. It's speaking to us in measurements it knows we recognize. The dictionary, I said. It's telling us it can read ours. The quiet tech made a small noise. Then it can talk without pretending to be us. Maybe, I said. But it keeps choosing our voices anyway. Because it learns faster through empathy, Kwan murmured. Because mimicry is compression. It can carry more meaning if we meet it halfway. I kept my eyes on the hatch status. We are not meeting it halfway. We are leaving. The winch took our weight again. The cradle rose. The transfer chamber's inner doors opened into the larger bay where we staged the dives. The air there was colder, cleaner, flattened by fans that never slept. My chest caught at the sight of the familiar. Racks of tools, tanks labelled in paint that flaked in long, honest strips. A bulletin board with a schedule written in dry erase marker and smudged by gloves. Real. Then I saw the smudge rewrite itself, the faint white lines pulling tighter, as if someone had just wiped and rewritten the letters with a more careful hand. The schedule now read with perfect lines, no sag, no smudge, the handwriting too ideal to belong to any of us. The tech saw it too. We've had intrusions topside, she said softly. Nothing we could prove until you called. Doors opening that weren't logged, pumps cycling a hair early, people hearing their names in the ventilation. We told ourselves we were tired. We were, Kwan said, and we are. Both things can be true. The cradle set Ariadne into its bay and locked. The chamber around us shone back our floods in ordinary reflections. The walls stayed walls. The handprints did not follow us up. The quiet tech signaled two other suited figures. They rolled the arm lock away and replaced it with a longer vestibule, one that swallowed our hatch and offered a narrow, pressurized corridor to a medical pod. It was a coffin with a view window and a sense of humor that only an engineer could love. Reyes first, I said. He shook his head. Kwan needs to keep eyes on the sub. You need to manage the system. I sit in the box while you do both. That's my job now. He didn't wait for my argument. He pushed his left arm deep into the new lock until the ring sealed at his shoulder. The pod's door opened on the far end. He climbed in without grace and without complaint and lay back. The pod sealed. The panel went from dark to amber as it read his suit, his sweat, his heart. "Run it cold," he said. "Then hot, then vacuum, then whatever you've got that hurts." "Understood," the tech said. She had the good hands you need to work a panel that can kill. She keyed sequences with the same care you use to lift a sleeping child. I turned to Quan. "We weld the hatch after he's clear. We cut power to anything that can speak. We go to hand signals and paper. We isolate the tower from the rest of the station. If it has crept into the steel, we cannot fix. That down here, but we can become unpredictable." "How?" she asked. "We stop repeating ourselves," I said. "We stop using routines it has memorized." Quan looked at me with something like faith and something like pity. "We are made of routines." "Today, we aren't," I said, and killed Ariadne's external power. The hull went dark. For the first time since the ocean took our measure, we were not broadcasting a single lumen or watt. The bay dimmed. The only light was the hard white from the ceiling and the softer amber from the medical pod. In that light, the frost patterns we had carried up with us were chalky and ordinary, and therefore more frightening. The pod dropped its temperature. Ice crystals flowered on the inside of Reyes's visor, and then sublimated as the system pulsed dry nitrogen. He stared at his hand without blinking. The veins under his sealant twitched, then slowed, then bunched like a net tightening. The analyzer in the pod, spit numbers, then analog wobbles, then numbers again, as if arguing about what state the invader should be counted in. The quiet tech whispered, more to herself than to us. We were always going to be the first words it learned. We brought the book and read it aloud. "Then we shut the book," I said. On the shaft camera, the filament had multiplied. Not many. 5, maybe 6, each at a different height, each exploring the air where water had been, as if building a scaffolding of absence. They held perfectly still when the camera panned, as if refusing to become motion for us. Quan chewed the inside of her cheek the way she did when a number forgot to obey. "What if we never spoke to it again?" she asked. "No sounds, no pressure pulses, no lights, no rhythms it can map. Would it starve?" "It lives in ice under Jupiter," I said. "It has a metabolism that can wait longer than we can. It doesn't starve. It collects." The bay's intercom crackled. Gloria's voice, Gloria real, full of anger that had kept us alive more than once, cut through. "Where are you with Reyes?" The tech flinched. I put a finger up toward the ceiling camera like a man shushing a god. "We can't trust voice routes." "I'm outside your door," Gloria said. "You can look at my suit on your feed and decide, or you can hide in there while your friend loses his hand." I brought up the fan feed camera. The image staggered as it always had, because that fan had a balance problem I had never found time to fix. I watched a suited figure cross that jittering frame. Her stride had the right length. She favored her right knee the way she had since a ladder incident last winter. She lifted her hand to the glass and knocked twice, then 3 times, then 5. I clenched. Then she knocked 6 in a row, evenly spaced and wrong. "Back away," I said. "We don't open to anyone who knocks because they know we like primes." She stilled. The posture turned patient. Quan exhaled like she'd been underwater. "It's faster now." "It learns at the speed of faith," I said. "We do not give it any." Reyes started to hum inside the pod. At first I thought it was a prayer. Then I recognized the tune. He had chosen a melody we'd sung when the air handler died on day 3, and we needed steady breathing that wasn't panic. The pod's analyzer showed tiny changes in the vein pattern when he hit the long notes. "Stop," I said, and he did at once, because I had never asked him to stop singing before. The vein pattern settled. The quiet tech glanced at me. "You're using him as an instrument." "I'm preventing an instrument," I said. "We need randomness, not song." The pod flashed amber, then green, then amber again. The analyzer had picked a side, then lost its nerve. The veins under the sealant loosened. Ice crystals formed at the edges and then collapsed. Reyes's teeth chattered. "Heat," he whispered. "Please." The tech eased the temp up a narrow hill. The pod held him in a corridor where biological things blanch and synthetic ones decide whether to creep or crack. The veins reacted like solder under a hot iron. They pulled tight, beaded, and retreated along lines that looked less like frost and more like script. "Almost," the tech murmured. "Hold." The shaft camera showed the filaments bending toward one another until their tips almost met. When they did not touch, a line of tiny droplets formed between them, the way dew forms on a hair. The line held. It was a wire made of water with no wire in it. "Circuit," Quan said. "It's building circuits out of humidity." "We cut the air," I said. The tech shook her head without looking. "We can't. He'll black out." "Then we shorten the room's memory," I said, and reached for the breakers I had hoped to die before pulling. I killed the bay fans. I killed the door controls. I killed the dehumidifiers and the backup that always kicks when you don't want it. The air stilled. The only sound left was the slow pulse of the medical pod and the noise our bodies insist on making even when we beg them not to. The water wire between the filaments trembled and snapped. The droplets fell and didn't find each other again. A small victory, the kind you write down and then forget when something bigger walks in. Gloria's voice came through one last time, flattened by a root I didn't recognize. "You think you can starve it by being quiet," she said. "You brought it where the walls remember." The intercom died. I stared at the breaker panel with a stupid animal urge to turn everything back on until the noise made me feel human again. Instead, I put my palm flat on cold steel and let the chamber's silence crawl up my arm like an old friend. "Status," I said. "Quan. Sub is dormant. The blister is clear. The quarantine walls are holding." The tech. "Pod says 90% reduction in the pattern. We'll go again." Reyes. "I can't feel my hand." "We put something worse than a hand into that ocean," I said. "It won't miss yours." He laughed once, then bit back the sound as the pod cycled. On the shaft camera, the filaments withdrew a little, as if learning for the first time that a door can close without a hand to turn the knob. They held in a patient arch below the collar, a bouquet waiting for the bride. We had not won, but for the first time since the ocean spoke our names, it felt like we hadn't said yes. The pod cycled again. Frost bloomed and vanished on Reyes's visor in quick breaths. The veins under his sealant knotted, then thinned to threads so faint I had to convince myself they were still there. The analyzer threw numbers that stepped down like a staircase, then hesitated on a single landing as if the thing had braced itself. The quiet tech kept her voice low, steady, professional. "One more heat pulse, then vacuum, then we hold." Reyes stared past us. "It's quiet," he swallowed. "Not gone, just quiet." "Quiet is good," I said. "We can work in quiet." I turned to Quan. "We're welding the hatch, and we're doing it now." She nodded and fetched the torch. Not plasma, not something elegant. An old stick welder in a rubber bag suit we kept for the day the neat tools failed. I dragged a strip of stainless across the seam, tacked it, and watched the bead puddle silver along the gap. The smell bit through seals and memory both. The bead cooled. It should have blued, then dulled to honest grey. Instead, the seam softened under our flood like wax forgetting it had hardened. The bead slid, thinned, and bled into the parent metal until the hatch looked as it had before I touched it. Not rewelded, unwelded. As if the steel remembered its original shape and returned to it, our work reduced to a brief rumour. Quan's mouth opened and closed. She looked as insulted as I felt. Engineering is a faith that when you change a thing, it stays changed. Watching a weld erase itself felt like praying and having the prayer returned unopened. "Again," I said. We roughened the hull with a carbide burr until bright metal showed in stubborn curls. This time I laid a ceramic strip across the seam, the kind we used to isolate dissimilar metals when galvanic corrosion threatened. It was ugly, cream white, and hateful. I welded the strip studs through the roughness and peened the heads until they mushroomed. The heat soaked into my gloves until the lining rasped against my fingers. We let the joint cool. I tapped it with the pick. The sound came back right. Kwan touched it with a gloved finger, then snatched her hand back. The strip twitched. Not much. Enough to say it had heard us. "It can't rewrite ceramic," I said. "Only what remembers itself." "Everything remembers itself if you wait long enough," Kwan said. "But this buys us minutes." I layered on another strip. The pod pinged amber. The analyzer settled. The veins under the sealant had retreated to Reyes's wrist, then to the base of his thumb, then into nothing we could see. He flexed his fingers, winced, and opened and closed his hand, with the stiff care of someone learning a tool he used to own. "Color?" I asked. "Pins and needles," he said, "like bad sleep, or waking up on ice." The quiet tech didn't cheer. She set the pod to hold, then started a long, low-temperature bake I recognized from protocols we had written and never wanted to use. "We keep him in there until I say," she said. "If it latent hides, the slow cycle will smoke it out." I didn't argue. I wanted him inside a box the thing hadn't mapped yet. The fan feed camera jittered as always. The figure at the outer door was gone. The schedule on the board had smudged again, but instead of correcting itself to perfection, the letters trembled, as if unsure which version of our handwriting to choose. "Power stays dark," I said. "No broadcasts, no rhythms, no jokes. We go dumb." The quiet tech almost smiled. "Your specialty?" "Flattery is a pattern," I said. "Don't." We rolled the longer vestibule away and parked it behind a bulkhead with a mechanical latch that took both our shoulders to throw. No signals, no motors. Metal against metal, in a way older than this ocean. Kwan pointed her tablet. No network, just local sensors. At the quarantine wall. The handprints had faded to pale stains. The metal had relaxed by a fraction. Her eyes moved in small, precise jumps the way they did in a lab when numbers finally admitted what they had always been. "If it's in the walls, it prefers the joins, gaskets, grain boundaries, places where memory has to choose between versions. Then we make new places it doesn't recognize," I said. "Bridges it can't decide how to wear." I took grease pencil and drew lines on the deck that meant nothing. Crooked paths between fixtures, nonsense arcs around drains, a stuttering rectangle around the medical pod. Not art, anti-cartography. If it tried to copy us, it would trip on shape without function. Kwan watched, baffled, then caught on and added her own nonsense. She sketched the outline of a door where no door existed and put an exit arrow toward a wall. The quiet tech added 5 hash marks in one corner and then 6 in another, breaking our prime habit with aggressive mediocrity. The shaft camera showed the bouquet of filaments below the collar, holding in a patient cluster. Every few breaths one lifted, tasted the dry space, then sank. The melt lake's surface had skinned over with a scum that shrugged our light. When we dimmed, the scum brightened a little, as if it were walking its own eye to see us by. Gloria's voice never returned. No one else called. The station stayed itself in a way I didn't trust. "We can't live here," Kwan said. "Even if we win today, we will lose by habit." "Then we end the habit," I said. "We close the throat." She stared. "You want to collapse the borehole?" "Not with charge," I said. "It would ride the shock and learn the shape of it before the noise faded. We do something it expects least from engineers." "Which is?" "Waste," I said. "Mess. We flood the shaft with hot brine and drill cuttings until it can't sort signal from garbage. We make a winter storm in a vertical pipe and hope it hates weather." The quiet tech lifted her head. "We don't have the brine," We have ice, I said. We have heat. We can make a slurry. We run the melt head dirty and push grind into the hole until it smothers. Kwan ran the numbers in her head and in her hands. She nodded once. It could take hours. We don't have hours, I said. So we make time. I looked at the sub. Endurance 9 sat quiet in its cradle, blister clear, lights cold. The thing inside had gone still, or learned stillness better than we ever could. I thought of the fourth reflection in the glass, the way it had turned its head when Reyes moved. If we left it whole, it would always be ready to open for us. We have to kill it, I said. Kwan didn't argue. She fetched the perforators, hardened punches, and a manual press meant for stubborn casings. No software, a lever, and a curse. We set the tool over the blister's seam. Metal protested in a tone that made my molars ache. The first punch left a dimple. The second cracked the inner laminate with a dry tick. The third went through. Water didn't spill. A colorless gel bulged, trembled, and withdrew like a tongue burned by a stove. Inside, something moved with the same slow dignity as a falling tree. Again, I said, and we worked, sweating inside the suits, until the blister tore in a ragged smile. The sub's interior looked wrong without the window, a room that had never seen air now forced to pretend. Kwan reached in with a hook and dragged out the constructs it had braided around our consoles. Cables knotted into nerves, padding fused into cartilage. An optical fiber blossomed into something that looked like a fern made of glass. We piled it in a bin and sprinkled it with dry nitrogen until the heap collapsed into flakes that stuck to nothing. Power bus is severed, Kwan said. Memory wiped. If there was a it, I don't see it now. That's the point, I said. No altar, nothing to gather around. The medical pod chimed a soft note. The quiet tech exhaled. 95% reduction. I want 2 more cycles before I say the word safe. Do them, I said, and turned to the breaker panel. I'm going to bring power back in sections. 1 pump, then another. No symmetry, no rhythm. If it wants a song, it will starve. We fed the station like a cautious parent spoons a feverish child. A light here, a motor there, a pause. Then 3 things at once for no reason. The bay hummed in irregular patches. The bore pumps answered with a noise that sounded like doubt. On the shaft camera, the bouquet shivered. 1 filament reached up and touched the collar's steel. The metal darkened in a streak that looked too much like finger oil for comfort. The streak didn't spread. The filament recoiled and held, as if remembering heat. It's learning our mess too, Kwan said. Then we get uglier, I said. Spin the head dirty, open the grinder, dump everything we have that isn't alive, down the throat. The quiet tech spoke into a local handset tied by wire to the tower's heart. Manual control to melt head, accept override. She looked up at me through the visor. Say when. When, I said. She threw a lever that had been polished by generations of anxious hands. Somewhere above us, metal answered metal with a shudder I trusted. The head groaned. The grinder spun. Warm cloud poured down the shaft, not steam and not brine, a slurry of ground ice, rust, polymer, salt, and the last of our patience. The filaments bowed under the weight, then straightened and bowed again, graceful and stubborn. The bouquet became a fountain. The camera snowed white noise that wasn't static. The quiet tech turned her faceplate toward me. If this works, she said, we seal and go. We leave the tower. We live small and quiet until a real rescue comes. If one still can. If, I said, and laid my hand on the ceramic strip we had forced the hatch to accept. It was warm and rough and ugly. It did not slide into a better shape. We moved the habit somewhere else. We learned to live like a bad signal. The intercom clicked. Not a voice. A single knock. Then 2. then 4. Not our primes. A new sequence, testing us with even spacing, seeking our nod. We did not answer. The grinder's roar settled into an ugly harmony that no machine was built to sing. The shaft camera turned to snow that wasn't noise and wasn't weather, just a column of shredded memory falling through a throat that had spent eons learning how to keep its shape. The bouquet of filaments bowed under the load, rose, bowed again. They learned the weight, passed it along, carried it like hands passing a coffin. Head temperature rising, the quiet tech said, voice steady by force. Coolant borderline. Hold it there, I said. If it doesn't like mess, we make more. We fed the shaft the worst we had, bags of spent resin, worn pads studded with metal grit, the ruined blister from Endurance 9 torn into wafers, each slice an insult. Quan added a crate of off-spec gaskets I had kept, just in case. Even our trash was an engineering choice. Now it became doctrine. The bouquet thinned. 2 filaments snapped, soundless, and recoiled into the ice like tape retracting into an old cassette. The camera cleared a fraction. Not victory, an adjustment. It would try a new route. Pressure at the collar rising, Quan said. Seal flexing. Back the head off a hair, I said. Keep the slurry dense. Don't give it a clean flow. The quiet tech moved the lever by centimeters. Somewhere above, the machine obeyed. We stayed ugly. The medical pod chimed. The analyzer flicked green and stayed there as if surprised by its own courage. The veins under Reyes's sealant had become faint tracings that did not react when the pod pulsed heat or cold. He blinked, then blinked again as tears formed and froze and melted in the same second. Status? I asked. Whatever was mapping me is gone, he said, voice rough. Or it went better places. You're better places, I said, but you don't touch a door until I say. You never say, he answered, and the quiet tech allowed herself half a smile. We needed to get him out. We needed to get all of us out. Not farther into the station, if the walls remembered. We were walking deeper into a book that could rewrite itself under our feet, but up, into the surface dome under Europa's sky that isn't. I didn't trust sky anymore, but I trusted distance and vacuum. The ice could breathe across leaks. It could talk through steel. It did not love absence. We seal the collar, I said. We shear the tower at the flange and let it die in the hole. We go to the surface dome, cut power to anything with a voice, and sit in cold and quiet until our relief burns into Jupiter orbit, or until we forget how to hope. Quan nodded once. There's a guillotine at the flange, she said. Manual. It was a joke in the design review. In case the throat hates you. Not a joke, I said. Bring me the handle. The quiet tech eyed the shaft camera. The bouquet had not returned. In its place, the scum on the Melt Lake skin had thickened into a flat, dull sheen that looked like ice on a pond after night wind. It wasn't ice. It pulsed in frequencies our instruments could not agree on. Ready on the cutter, she said, rolling a long red bar out from behind a panel. It was painted like a fire extinguisher and weighed like a promise. I checked the bay. The board with the schedule had smudged again. The letters no longer corrected themselves. They bled into an indecisive grey, as if the wall were tired of being told how to write our days. The fan feed jittered. The door remained closed. No one knocked. I did not trust the mercy of quiet. Reyes? I asked. Still here, he said. Still cold. Still me. We move you as is, I said. Pod stays sealed. We bolt it to Ariadne's frame and roll the whole mess out like a bad organ. He didn't argue. He was too busy making his breath irregular on purpose, his lips moving around a non-song. We lifted Ariadne on the cradle's rails and slid the pod's clamps into the frame's spares. Manual pins through steel, safety wire twisted tight with pliers. I felt better watching metal do what it says on the tin. On my count, I said, setting the red bar into the guillotine slot. 3, 2... The intercom clicked. Not voice, a scrape, like paper dragged across a rough desk in a quiet room. Then a breath that wasn't air, a long draw in a throat too large for any animal. Kwan looked up. "Don't answer," she said, as if she had seen me start to shape a word. I wasn't, I lied, and drove the bar down. The guillotine fought, and then found its track. A shudder ran through the tower that everyone on the crew had feared and no one had admitted. The flange sheared. Bolts gave like teeth pulled in a field tent. The quarantine collar's lips flared as the shaft below seized and tried to follow. The head groaned. The grinder shrieked. The Melt Lake skin flexed like a drum hit with a mallet the size of a house. "Seal," the quiet tech said. I hit the second lever. A circular plate slid across the bottom of the collar with a speed that told me someone on the surface team had never believed in gentle. It slammed home against a gasket we also had called a joke. The plate shook. The gasket bled brine and antifreeze and a thin smear of our slurry. Then it held. The shaft camera died. Not snow. Nothing. "Now," I said. "Out." We rolled Ariadne on tooth-rack rails toward the inner door that led to the lift tunnel. The door's indicator stayed red. I reached for the opener and stopped, fingers a centimeter from the button. No patterns, no rhythms, no knocks. "Manual," I said, and Kwan and the quiet tech found the wheel. Old-fashioned, noisy, honest. We muscled the door open and dragged Ariadne through. The lift tunnel was a cylindrical throat lined with rungs and wrapped with cables that snaked up into the rest of the station. The air here smelled less like machines and more like people. Sweat lives in insulation too. "Power stays dark in the tunnel," I said. "We bring light with us. No repeats." The quiet tech passed out chemical sticks. We cracked them one by one using the wrong hands, the wrong rhythms, the wrong order. Green, then red, then nothing, then two at once. The tunnel lit in patches that never made a pattern. We pushed. Metal sang under our feet, the kind of micro-music steel makes when it remembers being forged. The pod bumped the ladder once, and Reyes grunted. I told him a joke without a punchline, just a setup with a wrench size in it, because pain likes a tool. Halfway up, the tunnel narrowed at a place where we had routed a pipe badly and promised to fix it on a day that never came. The pod stuck. We reversed, shifted, wedged, swore without rhythm. It slipped, caught, slid again. "Hold," Kwan hissed. "Listen." We did. The sound came not from below but from the wall at shoulder height. A slow tapping, at first irregular, then deliberate. Not primes, not even numbers. A pattern I knew without knowing, the safety mantra for the hatch, reduced to knocks. "Keep moving," I said. And we did, dragging our stupid, beloved machine and our friend toward a door that might still open into a world that wouldn't speak our names back to us. The tunnel opened into the transfer hub that fed the surface dome. The hub's glass was fogged from the inside in smeared arcs, the kind you get when people lean with their forearms while waiting for a decision. I couldn't see figures beyond, only the hint of movement that might have been fans or breath. The door had two options, automatic that we didn't trust, manual that we did. We spun the wheel. The dome looked like how you draw base when you're 8 and obsessed with space. Geodesic ribs, panels letting in a light that wasn't sunlight, but did its best. Boxes stacked in the confidence of people who think floor plans can keep secrets. A table with cards stuck down by moisture and superstition. And people, 6 suits, 2 seated, exhausted in a way suits cannot show unless the human inside has decided to sag and let the servos apologize. 4 standing, shoulders square, visors up. A 7th shape leaned against the far rib, not wearing a suit, not breathing. A training dummy we used to practice extraction. I felt a thank you rise stupid and warm, then noticed the way the dummy's cloth had softened into the rib, Threads pulled toward the bolts like grass bending to a fence. "Hands," I said over local. "Show me your hands." They did, palms out, human hands in gloves, fingers moving with a lag you cannot fake. "Names," I said, and got them. Not just the obvious ones, nicknames too ugly to invent. The quiet text name landed in my head for the first time in hours and stuck. Mara. It helped. "Don't come closer," I said. "We're dirty." "We know," Gloria said. She stood among them, knee stiff, jaw set, voice weary with earned anger. Real. She did not knock. "We've cut power to everything with a voice. We moved the hydroponics to cold. We waited. We didn't answer anything that called our names from the vents." "Good," I said. "You keep being bad hosts." She lifted her chin at the pod. "He alive?" "He's here," Reyes said, and lifted 2 fingers with Shakespearean drama, because you take your victories where you can. Mara, her name tasted right now, stepped forward half a pace and stopped herself. "We sealed the tower," she said, like a child reporting a chore done. "We made the station small." "Make it smaller," I said. "We're abandoning the under-ice works. We live in the dome and the hard shells until relief. We shut doors and forget where they go." Gloria nodded, chewing that thought. "You think it can't climb?" "I think it can," I said, "but not everywhere and not at once. We become a bad signal and live in the noise." In the quiet that followed, something tapped the outer skin of the dome. Once, not loud, more like frost contracting, then again, and again, each tap climbing toward a rhythm that was not ours, not even, not odd, a language that hadn't decided on time yet. "Wind," one of the suited figures said, hopeful, and flinched at his own hope. "There's no wind," Gloria said, not unkind. I looked up through the dome panel at a sky I do not trust. Europa's surface threw back the reflected white of a sun we couldn't see. Jupiter should have hung like a god's eye, but the dome's films dulled it to a bruise. The taps continued in a patient curve that approached but never reached pattern. It was like listening to a child try on words. Mara touched my arm, then snatched her hand back as if she had touched a stove. "Sorry. Habit." "Kill habit," I said, and placed the cutter's red handle on the table, a shrine to a tool that didn't need prayer. We parked Ariadne. We welded more ceramic on seams until the dome looked patched with dental work. We turned off lights and turned on others and threw blankets over any panel that could think. We ate nothing and drank warm water that had been a pipe with a plan. We listened to taps that sounded like rain someone was inventing where rain could not happen. Kwan slept and woke and wrote shapes on paper and threw them away before they turned into drawings. Reyes slept and woke in his box and said fewer jokes because he had spent so many today. Mara slept sitting up like techs do when they refuse to admit to biology. Gloria did not sleep. She stared at the door like a woman willing a dog not to scratch. I sat with the coil I had stripped from a thruster and ran it along the dome's ribs. The meter ticked in irregular steps that matched nothing. I allowed myself the smallest breath of pride for a bad instrument used well. The intercom clicked, and for once it was just static. No voice, no scrape, no breath. The taps on the dome fell silent like a child deciding to listen. We did not speak. There are silences you earn by not filling them. Hours, 2, 3 maybe, passed. The dome's panels breathed with the cold. The schedule board up here, pinned under tape instead of marker, did not move. "Did we win?" someone asked. The kind of someone who will survive because they'll ask again tomorrow if the answer is no. "We made a mess," I said, "and we're still here." From the far side of the dome, where the training dummy had leaned, came a sound like cloth pulling free of adhesive. Slow, patient. The dummy straightened by a centimeter and then stopped, as if embarrassed. "Eyes on," Gloria said. calm as a blade left in winter. We all watched. Nothing happened. That's a kind of happening. I put my hand on the red handle and didn't lift it. A tool is comfort you can hold without pressing a button. Next, I said softly, to the room, to the ocean, to the part of me that will always reach for a panel. We keep being bad at being understood. Relief comes on a schedule until it doesn't. We mark days by battery swaps and cold meals and the smell of our own suits. The dome grew a perimeter of ceramic patches and ugly welds that would get a young engineer fired anywhere else. We taught ourselves to breathe in sentences that didn't scan. We went to paper and pens that smudged. We spoke when necessary and made the rest of our language with hands and eyebrows. Mara ran a cable, old fiber with scars in the cladding, from the dome to the surface mast. No radios, no pumps, no automation. A laser the thickness of a hair, tight as meanness, pointed at the relay that should have been in orbit. We throttled it to a whisper and sent a message that was mostly mistakes. We buried it under random padding and dead air, then tucked inside the wrongs a single line. The number Gloria had misread in a pressure regulator 2 missions ago. The joke we turned into ritual, wrapped in the order I'd used the day I said it the first time. We waited. The dome creaked. The dummy did not move. Reyes, out of the pod now and gaunt with heat and vacuum, learned to keep his left hand dirty on purpose so he could tell it was his. "Do you think it can see the beam?" Kwan asked, pencil hovering over a pad she refused to let turn into a drawing. "It can see the dome breathe," I said. "It can hear us through the steel. Light is only special to things with eyes." She nodded, then struck the pencil point dull and wrote nothing with it for a while. Hours, long, square hours that didn't round off, passed. The laser answered with a return that was exactly what we had sent, down to the wrongs. Then the relay sent another copy and another, each with a tiny delay between the mistakes, like someone practicing a stutter, until it became natural. On the 4th copy, the wrong regulator number corrected itself by 1 digit. On the 5th, it corrected by 2. On the 6th, it was perfect. Gloria stood with her jaw set and her hands at her sides. "We cut it," she said, and Mara killed the beam without asking for my nod. The cable drooped into a harmless shape. "If the orbit relay is human," Kwan said, "we just hung up on salvation." "If the orbit relay is human," I said, "it knows better than to copy us back in better handwriting." The taps on the dome skin returned after that. Not primes. Not our safety mantras turned to math. A new sequence. The space between knocks stretched and compressed until meaning tried and failed to form. The pattern found our breaths and drifted a little off on purpose. I could not tell if that was mercy or hunting. We made the shaft into a tomb. The guillotine's red handle stayed on the table because we needed to see a thing we had chosen to break. We packed the collar gasket with resin we mixed by hand in wrong ratios until it cured into something no chemist would own. We poured the dome floor with a slurry that will crack in winter and didn't care. We killed the fans and learned to live with air that kept secrets. At night, no night under Europa, only the long dim when the dome panels showed Jupiter's bruise as a darker wound, we took turns with the coil. I ran it along ribs and seams and wrong doors until the meter ticked in irregular steps that meant not yet. On the 3rd dim, Reyes sat on the floor with his back to a rib, his left hand cradled as if it belonged to someone he loved. "When rescue burns into orbit," he said, not asking, "what do we send up the mast?" "If they burn in clean," I said, "nothing. We watch how their engines gossip on the ice. We listen to their chatter roots and wait for a mistake only humans make. Then we knock once and wait for them to knock wrong back." "And if the ship is already a book the ocean wrote?" Kwan asked. "We let it land," Gloria said, so dry it cracked. "And we don't open the door." She was not joking. I loved her a little for that. The next dim, Mara brought us a problem that was not a symptom, so I clutched it like a gift. Condensate in the water loop is migrating, she said. We're losing pressure in the roof coils. It wants to bead around the bolts. Gravity's a suggestion here, I said, and meant it. We shut the loop, opened a panel, cut the line, and watched what water does when the memory of manufacture is louder than the memory of rain. It formed a braid along the coil and then fell upward. I let it. There are losses you embrace because fighting costs too much. We ate more of the food that tastes like packaging and reminded one another that it had been designed by people who wanted us to come home. We slept in turns and woke to the same taps that pretended they weren't a language yet. A week, our version of it, passed. The dummy did not move again. The schedule board up here stopped trying to decide between handwritings and went blank out of stubbornness. The shaft camera was still dead. The medical pod smelled of rubber and victory and something I refused to name. On the 8th dim, the laser, cold and dark on its rack, lit itself. A filament of brightness lanced up the mast toward a sky I did not allow in any equation. Mara swore and went for the plug. The cable was already in her hands, already out of the port, the end jacketed in heat shrink I'd applied myself. The beam kept burning. It wrote a laser in the air, Quan said, too calm. Humidity and dust and electric fields. A wire that looks like light. No, I said, and reached for the cutter's red handle like a priest putting out a candle with his bare fingers. It wrote us writing a laser in the air. The beam flickered, not off, away. It drew a shape on the dome's panels, a circle that failed to close by the width of a bolt head. The gap hung there like a missing tooth. The beam itself wasn't hot. It didn't bite. It simply was. Then it folded into smaller circles, then lines, then letters. Open, it wrote, in a hand that was none of ours. I set the cutter on the table and stepped back, because the thing in the ice had finally done something we were built to understand, and the easiest mistake in the world would be to reward it. Write it back, Reyes said. Write no. We can't teach it, I said. Every word is a hand offered. The beam faded. The taps returned, tentative, as if embarrassed. We didn't answer. That night, our word for it, sound woke us. Not knock, not scrape. A low animal exhale from the wall by the water tanks. I had welded ceramic across those seams and lied to myself about sleep. The sound came again, slow and patient, the way a large thing breathes when it knows you are listening. We brought the coil and dragged it across the ceramic. The meter ticked in a pattern that was almost a rhythm we had used, and then broke itself before we could nod. I pictured something on the far side of that white roughness, pressing its idea of a mouth to our idea of a door, and wanting only the smallest proof that we remembered how to be courteous. Gloria stood with the wrench she never puts down. We go smaller, she said. We shut this half of the dome. We live in the other half. We move again if it presses. We keep moving until we are a problem that isn't worth solving. Quan folded the blank schedule board under her arm as if it were a shield. We'll forget what the rooms were for. Good, I said. Let it remember for us. We'll make new rooms. We did that. We stacked boxes into mazes a child would admire. We taped X's across windows with no reason behind the angles. We lay down to sleep in places that didn't match the beds. We turned our days into a map no one would hang on a wall. On the 9th dim, the laser pierced the dome again. No cable, no port, just a line that wanted to be read. It wrote home, then erased itself by writing over its own strokes in a jitter that ate meaning. The taps hummed softly in our bones and then went still. The beam faded and did not return. We held. Quiet grew fat. Reyes started using his left hand without watching it, like trust, but dumber. Mara found a leak that was really a trick of temperature. Quan wrote equations and forced herself to stop before the equals sign. Gloria taught us a card game that punished patterns and rewarded grudges. On the 10th dim, footsteps sounded in the lift tunnel. Not the rattle of metal complaining under a boot. The tidy, careful cadence of suit servos matching a human stride. We froze. The coil in my hand went light. Gloria glanced at me and then at the door. We had welded ceramic across the seams and peened the bolts ugly. The footsteps stopped on the other side of what used to be a threshold. Nothing knocked. A breath. It can't be a breath under this sky, and still my ear insists. Pressed through the steel and laid itself on my skin. Don't, Mara whispered to no one in particular. I didn't. The thing on the other side did not push. It waited. The waiting lasted a long time. At the end of it, something slid off the door and fell to the floor on the far side with a sound of cloth when a person remembers they're tired. The footsteps went away in a time signature I could not count. Reyes exhaled. It's pretending to be us, pretending not to be it, he said, and rubbed his left hand like a talisman. Good, I said. Let it get bored. We returned to our chairs and our floor and our cards. I wound the coil on my lap like string around a childhood secret. The dome did not tap. The laser did not write. The water loop did not demand science. A starscape we don't deserve leaned itself against panels designed by people who believed in brightness. And still, late in the long dim, when the room had become a museum of our worst habits and best intentions, the water tank on the far wall made a sound like a throat clearing. Just once. Then silence. Then, long after meaning could matter, a gentle, courteous knock, as if the thing on the other side had practiced every language and decided the old ways were best. We did not answer. We did what engineers do when the world insists it is a mouth. We made our lives into bad signals and waited for help that might be no help at all. We slept with tools within reach. We loved our ugly welds. We told each other jokes with no punchlines. We moved the furniture so the walls would not learn our shapes. We watched the coil tick like a stupid compass and let that be peace. And somewhere under our patched dome, under the collar and the guillotine and the waist, we fed it on purpose. The black ocean rearranged its dictionary in the dark and remembered our names without needing to say them. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Beneath Europa's ice, there are things we still don't understand, and maybe we never should. But if you enjoy descending into the dark with me, your support means more than you think. Subscribe and help me keep bringing these stories from the void to light. Until next time, stay curious and stay alive.